The Mediterranean sun cast long shadows across the pristine deck of the luxury yacht Royal Dawn as it cut through the crystal-clear waters off the coast of Monaco. Camilla Richardson stood at the bow, her designer sunglasses reflecting the endless blue horizon. At 45, she was the picture of refined elegance, her auburn hair flowing in the gentle sea breeze. To anyone watching from the distant shore, she appeared to be just another wealthy socialite enjoying her afternoon cruise. But appearances can be deceiving. Captain Marcus Webb adjusted his position at the helm, stealing glances at his employer through the bridge windows. In his 20 years of working for the ultra-rich, he had learned to read people like weather patterns. Camilla had been different these past few months. More secretive, more demanding, and definitely more paranoid. The constant phone calls in languages he didn't recognize, the mysterious cargo that came aboard under cover of darkness, and the way she would disappear into the yacht's lower decks for hours at a time. "Ma'am," called Sarah Chun, Camilla's personal assistant, approaching carefully with a satellite phone in her hand. "The call you've been waiting for." Camilla's expression shifted subtly, a flash of something. Anxiety? Excitement? Crossing her features before she composed herself. She took the phone and walked toward the yacht's private cabin, her heels clicking against the polished deck. "Yes," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, with a slight accent she couldn't quite place. "The package from Istanbul arrived safely. Our friends in Marseille are very pleased with the quality." Camilla closed her eyes briefly. "And the next shipment? Already in motion. The art pieces from Damascus should reach you by Thursday. Our Syrian contact assures us these are particularly valuable specimens." She knew what that meant. These weren't just any art pieces. They were ancient artifacts stolen from museums and archaeological sites during the chaos of ongoing conflicts. Priceless treasures that belonged in museums, not in the private collections of wealthy criminals who saw human heritage as commodities to be bought and sold. "The buyer in New York is getting impatient," the voice continued. "He's offering an additional $2 million if we can guarantee delivery before the month's end." $2 million. Camilla's heart raced, but not from excitement. The money had stopped being about luxury long ago. Now it was about survival. The deeper she had gotten into this world, the more dangerous it had become to try to leave it. She had started small, facilitating the sale of a few questionable paintings from her late husband's estate. But one deal had led to another, each more lucrative and more illegal than the last. "I'll make sure everything goes smoothly," she said finally. "See that you do. Our investors don't appreciate delays." The line went dead, leaving Camilla staring at the phone in her trembling hands. She had never intended for things to go this far. When her husband died 3 years ago, she had discovered that his successful import business was built on a foundation of debt and questionable partnerships. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses, and the bills kept coming. The beautiful yacht, the penthouse apartment in Monaco, the designer clothes, it was all funded by money that didn't exist. That's when she met Viktor Petrov at a charity auction in London. Charming, sophisticated, and seemingly interested in her late husband's consulting services, Viktor had offered her a way out of bankruptcy. All she had to do was use her yacht for occasional art transportation between European ports. Easy money, he had said. No questions asked. But Camilla wasn't naive. She knew from the beginning that Viktor's art wasn't acquired through legitimate channels. The first shipment had been small, a few paintings wrapped in protective cloth, stored in the yacht's wine cellar for a 3-day cruise to Nice. The buyer had been a nervous-looking man with expensive tastes and no interest in provenance. The money had been incredible, more than she had made in 6 months of legitimate work. It was enough to pay off her husband's debts and keep her lifestyle intact for another few months. But a few months wasn't enough. It never was. Now, 3 years later, the Royal Dawn had become a floating warehouse for some of Europe's most wanted stolen artifacts. Ancient Roman statues, medieval manuscripts, Byzantine mosaics, and artifacts looted from war-torn countries across the Middle East and North Africa. Each piece worth hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. Each piece representing a piece of human history lost forever to private greed. Camilla had tried to convince herself that she was just a middleman. She wasn't stealing these artifacts herself. She was just providing transportation. But, deep down, she knew she was complicit in erasing humanity's shared heritage for the sake of wealthy collectors who cared more about ownership than preservation. The yacht's intercom crackled to life. "Mrs. Richardson, We're approaching the coordinates you specified. Should I drop anchor? Camilla looked out the cabin window. They were in international waters now, far from the prying eyes of coastal authorities. In a few hours, a smaller vessel would arrive to take the latest shipment, a collection of ancient Mesopotamian tablets that had disappeared from the Iraq National Museum during the chaos following the American invasion. The tablets contained some of humanity's earliest written records, and now they would disappear into a private vault in Switzerland. Yes, Marcus, drop anchor and prepare for our evening guests. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, 3 crew members emerged from below deck carrying wooden crates. They moved with practiced efficiency, knowing exactly what they were handling and how valuable it was. Each crew member was handpicked by Victor's organization, former military, loyal only to money, and completely comfortable with the illegal nature of their work. Camilla watched them work, her mind racing. The money from tonight's transaction would set her up for life. She could disappear, change her name, buy a small house somewhere remote, and try to forget about the past 3 years. But she had been telling herself that for months now, and somehow there was always another shipment, another buyer, another reason to delay her exit from this world. The truth was, she was trapped. Victor's organization didn't let people simply walk away, especially not people who knew as much as she did about their operations. She had seen too much, transported too much, and made too much money to be allowed to retire peacefully. They owned her now, whether she admitted it or not. As darkness fell over the Mediterranean, the first lights of the approaching vessel appeared on the horizon. Right on schedule. The buyers were Germans this time, a consortium of private collectors who specialized in ancient Middle Eastern artifacts. They had connections to museums across Europe, selling fake pieces while keeping the originals for themselves. But tonight felt different somehow. As Camilla prepared to oversee another illegal transaction, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. Perhaps it was the way Captain Webb had been acting lately, more nervous, more reluctant to follow orders. Or maybe it was the strange boat that had been following them at a distance for the past few days, always staying just far enough away to avoid identification. Whatever it was, Camilla Richardson was about to discover that her life of luxury and crime was built on foundations far more unstable than her late husband's failing business. And sometimes when you build your life on lies and stolen treasures, the past has a way of catching up with you in the most unexpected ways. The approaching vessel grew larger against the darkening sky, its engines humming across the water. In a few minutes, representatives from Victor's organization would board the Royal Dawn to inspect the merchandise and complete the transaction. Another few $1 million would change hands. Another piece of human history would disappear forever, and Camilla would be one step deeper into a world from which there might be no return. But unbeknownst to everyone aboard the Royal Dawn, other vessels were moving through the darkness that night. Ships with very different intentions, crewed by people who had been watching and waiting for exactly this moment. The web of international crime that had made Camilla Richardson wealthy was about to become the trap that would destroy everything she had built. As she stood on the deck of her luxury yacht, surrounded by stolen treasures and counting her ill-gotten gains, Camilla had no idea that her empire of smuggled artifacts was about to crumble in the most spectacular and terrifying way possible. The storm that had been building for 3 years was finally about to break, and when it did, it would wash away everything she thought she knew about power, loyalty, and survival. The game was almost over. She just didn't know it yet. Commander James Mitchell adjusted his night vision goggles as he observed the Royal Dawn through the periscope of the surveillance vessel HMS Vigilant. For 6 months, his elite Royal Navy unit had been tracking the movements of what intelligence agencies believe to be one of Europe's most sophisticated artifact smuggling operations. Tonight, finally, they had enough evidence to move. "Sir, the target vessel has dropped anchor at the specified coordinates," reported Lieutenant Sarah Walsh, her fingers flying across the radar console. "We're picking up another vessel approaching from the northeast. Estimated arrival in 12 minutes. Mitchell nodded grimly. 6 months of careful surveillance, intercepted communications, and international cooperation had led to this moment. The investigation had started small. A tip from an art recovery specialist who had noticed suspicious patterns in the black market trade of Middle Eastern artifacts. But as they dug deeper, the scope of the operation became staggering. "Any word from our assets inside?" Mitchell asked, referring to the undercover agents who had infiltrated various parts of the smuggling network. Agent Rodriguez confirms the German buyers are on schedule. He's aboard their vessel and will provide real-time intelligence during the transfer. Walsh paused, pressing her earpiece. And, sir, Agent Cooper reports that the cargo manifest matches our intelligence. We're looking at approximately $15 million worth of stolen artifacts. $15 million. Mitchell had seen the photographs and documentation that Interpol had compiled. Ancient Sumerian tablets that belonged in museums, Roman sculptures that had been looted from archaeological sites, Byzantine mosaics cut from church walls during armed conflicts. Each piece represented not just monetary value, but irreplaceable human heritage that was being sold to the highest bidder. The investigation had revealed a network that stretched across continents. Artifacts were being stolen or looted in war-torn regions of Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, then transported through a complex web of intermediaries to wealthy collectors in Europe and North America. The Royal Dawn wasn't just a yacht. It was a floating warehouse that had facilitated the theft of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cultural treasures over the past 3 years. But tonight's operation wasn't just about stopping a single transaction. Intelligence agencies across Europe had been building cases against the entire network for years. Tonight's bust would provide the evidence they needed to dismantle an organization that had been operating with impunity for far too long. Movement on deck, reported Petty Officer Thompson from his position at the surveillance station. Multiple individuals handling wooden crates. Looks like they're preparing for the transfer. Mitchell felt the familiar tension that came before a major operation. They had one chance to get this right. The smuggling ring had operated successfully for years by being cautious, professional, and extremely violent when threatened. If tonight's operation failed, the evidence would disappear, and the key players would vanish into the international underworld where they might never be found again. Status report from all units, Mitchell commanded. Alpha Team in position. Came the response from the assault specialists who would board the Royal Dawn. We have clear sight lines to all deck positions. Bravo Team standing by. Reported the team responsible for intercepting the buyer's vessel. Target vessel is maintaining course and speed. Charlie Team ready. Confirm the backup unit that would secure the immediate area and prevent any escape attempts. Mitchell had been planning this operation for weeks, coordinating with international law enforcement agencies, art recovery specialists, and intelligence services across 3 continents. The Royal Navy's involvement wasn't typical for an artifact smuggling case, but the scale and international scope of the operation had made it a matter of national security. The investigation had revealed connections to terrorist financing, money laundering operations that funded extremist groups, and the systematic destruction of cultural heritage sites for profit. This wasn't just about greedy collectors buying stolen art. It was about criminal organizations that were literally selling pieces of human civilization to fund violence and chaos around the world. Sir, intercepted communication from the target vessel, reported the signals specialist. Audio is being processed now. Through his earpiece, Mitchell heard Camilla Richardson's voice as she spoke to someone below deck. Everything needs to be perfect tonight. Victor's people will be watching every detail. Viktor Petrov, the name that had appeared in intelligence files across Europe for the past 5 years. A former Russian military officer turned international criminal who specialized in high-value smuggling operations. Art, weapons, people, if there was money to be made, and laws to be broken, Victor was involved. But he was also extremely careful, never directly participating in transactions, and surrounding himself with layers of protection that made prosecution nearly impossible. Until now. Confirmation from our sources in Interpol, Walsh reported. Viktor Petrov is expected to personally oversee tonight's transaction. This might be our only chance to capture him. Mitchell felt his pulse quicken. Petrov was the kind of criminal who could disappear for years at a time, operating from different countries and identities while building his empire of illegal trade. If they could capture him tonight, it would deal a devastating blow to international organized crime. But it also made the operation infinitely more dangerous. Petrov didn't survive in his business by being trusting or careless. He would have backup plans, escape routes, and enough firepower to fight his way out of almost any situation. Update from Agent Rodriguez. Walsh continued. The buyer's vessel is carrying more personnel than expected. At least 12 armed individuals, possibly more in the lower decks. This was escalating beyond a simple arrest operation. Mitchell had to make a decision: proceed with the current plan and risk a potential firefight, or call for additional backup and risk losing the targets entirely. "Sir, new development," Thompson called out urgently. "We got a third vessel approaching from the south. Not on any of our expected manifests." Mitchell grabbed his binoculars and focused on the southern horizon. A sleek black speedboat was cutting through the water at high speed, heading directly for the Royal Dawn's position. This wasn't part of the intelligence they had gathered. "Can we identify the vessel?" "Negative, sir. No transponder signal, and it's moving too fast for detailed surveillance." Mitchell's mind raced through the possibilities. Additional buyers? Backup security for the smuggling operation? Or something else entirely? In 6 months of surveillance, they had never seen an unidentified third party involved in these transactions. "All units, be advised we have an unknown vessel approaching the target area. Maintain positions, but prepare for complications." As a mysterious speedboat drew closer, Mitchell could see armed figures on its deck. Whatever was about to happen, it was clear that tonight's operation had just become significantly more complex and dangerous. On the Royal Dawn, Camilla Richardson was pacing nervously across the deck, checking her watch repeatedly. The buyers were late, which never happened in Victor's organization. Punctuality wasn't just professional courtesy. It was a survival mechanism in a business where delays could mean the difference between profit and prison. "Ma'am, should we try to contact them?" asked Captain Webb, his voice tight with tension. "No," Camilla replied sharply. "We wait." Victor's instructions were clear: no unnecessary communications during the transfer. But privately, she was beginning to worry. 3 years of successful operations had made her complacent, but the past few weeks had felt different. Strange questions from people in Victor's organization, unexpected changes to shipping routes, and now this delay. Her instincts were telling her that something was wrong. The sound of approaching engines broke the silence, and Camilla felt a moment of relief as she saw the buyer's vessel approaching. But her relief was short-lived as she noticed the second boat, a sleek black speedboat that definitely wasn't part of the planned transaction. "Captain, are you expecting another vessel?" she called out to Webb. "No, ma'am. That boat wasn't on any of our manifests." Camilla felt the familiar cold fear that had become her constant companion over the past 3 years. In Victor's business, surprises were rarely pleasant. The black speedboat could mean competition, betrayal, or law enforcement. None of those options ended well for people in her position. As both vessels drew closer to the Royal Dawn, the tension on deck became palpable. The crew members who had been casually preparing for a routine transaction were now moving with the alert efficiency of people preparing for potential violence. Weapons appeared from hidden storage compartments, and escape routes were quietly identified and prepared. But none of them, not Camilla, not her crew, not even Victor's security team, had any idea that they were already surrounded by the most advanced surveillance operation the Royal Navy had ever mounted against civilian criminals. Every conversation was being recorded, every movement was being tracked, and every escape route had already been identified and blocked. In the darkness beyond the range of the Royal Dawn's lights, Commander Mitchell and his teams were making final preparations for an operation that would either destroy one of Europe's most dangerous criminal networks or result in a catastrophic failure that could cost lives and allow billions of dollars worth of stolen artifacts to disappear forever. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of priceless cultural treasures, international criminal organizations, and the people caught between law enforcement and the underworld. As the 3 vessels converged in the dark waters of the Mediterranean, nobody could predict how the night would end. But one thing was certain: by dawn, nothing would ever be the same again. The black speedboat arrived first, cutting through the water like a blade and pulling alongside the Royal Dawn with practiced precision. Viktor Petrov stepped aboard with the confident stride of a man who owned everything he touched. At 52, he was lean and dangerous, with steel-gray eyes that missed nothing and the kind of presence that made even hardened criminals nervous. Camilla Richardson felt her stomach clench as she watched him survey her yacht with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating territory. In 3 years of working for his organization, she had only met Victor in person twice before. His presence tonight meant this transaction was more important than she had realized, or that something had gone terribly wrong. "Camilla," Victor said in his softly accented English, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made her skin crawl. I trust everything is prepared for our guests. Of course, she replied, working to keep her voice steady. The merchandise is secured below deck, and Captain Webb has confirmed our position is optimal for the transfer. Victor nodded slowly, but his eyes never left her face. Good. Tonight's transaction is particularly important to our organization. The buyers represent a consortium that could become very valuable long-term partners. As he spoke, 4 of his security team spread out across the yacht's deck with military precision. These weren't the usual hired muscle that accompanied most of Victor's operations. These men moved like special forces veterans, and Camilla noticed that their weapons were more sophisticated than anything she had seen in previous transactions. "Is there something I should know?" she asked, unable to hide her growing anxiety. Victor's smile was cold and humorless. "In our business, my dear Camilla, there are always things one should know. The question is whether one is prepared to handle the consequences of such knowledge." Before she could respond, the sound of the second vessel's engines announced the arrival of the German buyers. But as her boat approached, Camilla noticed something that made her blood run cold. The vessel was larger than expected, and there were far more people aboard than any legitimate art transaction would require. "Victor," she said quietly, "that's not the usual setup for a simple purchase." "You're quite observant," he replied, his eyes tracking the approaching vessel. "Tonight's transaction is more complex than your typical operation. These buyers aren't just purchasing artifacts for private collections. They represent interests that extend far beyond the art market." Camilla felt the pieces of a terrifying puzzle beginning to fall into place. The increased security, Victor's personal presence, the unusual number of buyers. This wasn't just about selling stolen artifacts. This was about something much larger and infinitely more dangerous. Meanwhile, aboard HMS Vigilant, Commander Mitchell was watching the convergence of vessels through advanced surveillance equipment, and what he was seeing confirmed his worst fears about the scope of the operation they were about to disrupt. "Sir, facial recognition confirms Viktor Petrov aboard the target yacht," Lieutenant Walsh reported. "And we're identifying multiple individuals from Interpol's most wanted list aboard the buyer's vessel." Mitchell studied the intelligence feeds streaming across his monitors. Klaus Weber, wanted for arms trafficking across Eastern Europe. Dmitry Volkov, suspected of financing terrorist operations in the Middle East. Maria Santos, linked to money laundering operations that had funded extremist groups across 3 continents. This wasn't just an artifact smuggling operation. This was a meeting of some of the most dangerous international criminals in the world, and they were using stolen cultural treasures as currency for operations that could destabilize entire regions. Update from Agent Rodriguez, Walsh continued. He reports the buyers are carrying equipment that appears to be military-grade communications gear. This isn't just a purchase, it's a coordination meeting. Mitchell felt the weight of the decision he was about to make. They could proceed with the planned arrest operation and try to capture some of the most wanted criminals in the world, but the risk of casualties was enormous. Alternatively, they could continue surveillance and try to gather intelligence about future operations, but that would mean allowing billions of dollars in stolen artifacts to disappear into the international black market. "Sir, Agent Cooper is reporting unusual activity in the yacht's lower decks," Walsh said urgently. "Multiple armed individuals, and what appears to be equipment that isn't related to artifact storage." "What kind of equipment?" "Unknown, sir. But Agent Cooper describes it as sophisticated electronic gear, possibly communications or surveillance equipment." The Royal Dawn was beginning to look less like a smuggling vessel and more like a floating command center for international criminal operations. Mitchell realized they might have stumbled into something far larger than artifact theft. Back on the yacht, Camilla was beginning to understand that she had been naive about the true nature of her business partnership with Viktor Petrov. As representatives from the buyer's vessel boarded the Royal Dawn, she recognized faces from news reports about international terrorism and organized crime. "Victor," she said quietly, pulling him aside, "I didn't agree to facilitate meetings between these kinds of people. Our arrangement was about art transportation, nothing more." Victor's expression hardened. "Our arrangement, my dear Camilla, has evolved beyond your original understanding. You've been extremely useful to our organization, but your usefulness extends far beyond simply moving artwork from one location to another." "What do you mean?" "Your yacht provides an excellent platform for activities that require international mobility and complete discretion. The artifact transactions have been profitable, certainly, but they've also provided perfect cover for operations that are far more lucrative. Camilla felt the blood drain from her face as the full implications of Victor's words hit her. She hadn't just been smuggling artifacts. She had been unknowingly facilitating international criminal operations that could include weapons trafficking, terrorist financing, and activities that could result in the deaths of innocent people. "I want out," she said firmly. "Whatever this is, whatever you're planning, I want no part of it." Victor's laugh was soft and menacing. "I'm afraid that's no longer an option. You've seen too much, transported too much, and know too much about our operations. You're part of this organization now, whether you like it or not." As if to emphasize his point, two of his security team moved closer, their hands resting casually on their weapons. Camilla realized with growing horror that she wasn't just trapped in a criminal organization. She was trapped on her own yacht, surrounded by some of the most dangerous people in the world. The buyers had now assembled on the main deck, and Camilla could see them examining the wooden crates that contained the stolen artifacts. But she also noticed they were setting up communication equipment and consulting what appeared to be operational maps and documents that had nothing to do with art purchases. Klaus Weber, the arms trafficker she recognized from news reports, was speaking quietly into a satellite phone while studying what appeared to be shipping manifests and route plans. Dmitry Volkov was examining a laptop computer that showed what looked like financial transactions in multiple currencies and countries. This was a coordination meeting for international criminal operations, and the artifact sale was just a cover story. The stolen cultural treasures were being used as currency to fund activities that could result in violence and chaos across multiple continents. Camilla realized that every transaction she had facilitated over the past 3 years hadn't just been about selling stolen art to wealthy collectors. She had been unknowingly helping to finance terrorism, arms trafficking, and criminal operations that had probably resulted in the deaths of innocent people around the world. The weight of that knowledge was crushing. She had told herself that she was just a middleman, that she wasn't directly responsible for the theft of the artifacts or their ultimate destination. But now she understood that her yacht had been a crucial link in a chain of criminal activity that extended far beyond anything she had imagined. As Victor and his associates continued their meeting, preparing for operations that would use stolen cultural heritage to fund violence and chaos, Camilla found herself wondering if there was any way to escape the web of criminality that had consumed her life. But unbeknownst to everyone aboard the Royal Dawn, their time was running out. Commander Mitchell and his teams were making final preparations for an operation that would either capture some of the world's most wanted criminals or result in a confrontation that could leave dead bodies floating in the Mediterranean. In the darkness beyond the yacht's lights, the net was closing. The question was whether justice would prevail or whether the forces of international crime would prove too powerful for law enforcement to contain. Either way, Camilla Richardson was about to discover that some decisions can't be undone, and some knowledge comes with consequences that last a lifetime. The storm she had been running from for 3 years was finally about to break, and when it did, nothing would be left standing. The explosion of light and sound that shattered the Mediterranean night came without warning. High-powered searchlights erupted from multiple directions, turning the darkness around the Royal Dawn into blazing daylight. The thunderous roar of helicopter rotors filled the air as military aircraft appeared from seemingly nowhere, their spotlights converging on the yacht like the fingers of an angry god. "Attention vessels. This is the Royal Navy. You are surrounded. Shut down your engines and prepare to be boarded." Commander Mitchell's voice boomed across the water through military-grade speakers, his words carrying the absolute authority of law enforcement backed by overwhelming force. The carefully planned surprise had worked exactly as intended. The criminals on board the Royal Dawn had no time to react, no chance to escape, and no option but to surrender or fight. Viktor Petrov's reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. The man who had built an empire on careful planning and calculated risks transformed into something primal and dangerous when cornered. His hand moved to the weapon concealed beneath his jacket as his security team spread out across the yacht's deck with military precision. "This is impossible," he hissed, his cold eyes scanning the suddenly illuminated water around them. "My sources would have warned me about any law enforcement operation." But Camilla Richardson, standing frozen in the center of the chaos, understood something that Victor didn't. In 3 years of criminal activity, She had never quite managed to silence the voice in her head that told her this moment would eventually come. Justice had a way of finding people who built their lives on stolen treasures and broken laws. The German buyers were scrambling across their vessel in panic, trying to destroy evidence and secure escape routes that no longer existed. Klaus Weber was shouting orders in multiple languages while his associates worked frantically to sync communication equipment and financial records that could implicate criminal networks across Europe. On board HMS Vigilant, Mitchell was coordinating the most complex arrest operation of his career. Multiple vessels, international criminals, millions of dollars in evidence, and the potential for extreme violence. Every element had to be managed simultaneously to prevent casualties and ensure that none of the targets escaped. Alpha Team, initiate boarding procedures on the primary target, he commanded. Bravo Team, secure the buyer's vessel. Charlie Team, maintain perimeter and prepare for potential escape attempts. Lieutenant Walsh was tracking multiple communication channels as the operation unfolded. Sir, we're intercepting emergency communications from the target vessels. They're trying to coordinate resistance and destroy evidence. Any response from our undercover agents? Agent Rodriguez confirms he's in position to assist with securing the buyers. Agent Cooper is moving to protect evidence in the yacht's lower decks. Mitchell knew that the next few minutes would determine whether months of careful planning would result in the capture of international criminals or a catastrophic failure that could cost lives and allow billions of dollars in stolen artifacts to disappear forever. On the Royal Dawn, Victor was issuing rapid orders to his security team in Russian while keeping his weapon trained on the approaching naval vessels. His years of military training had prepared him for situations like this, and he wasn't planning to surrender without extracting a heavy price from his captors. Camilla, he said without taking his eyes off the military helicopters circling overhead, your cooperation over the past 3 years has been valuable, but I'm afraid your usefulness to our organization has come to an end. The implications of his words hit her like a physical blow. The first smoke grenades detonated across the yacht's deck, filling the air with thick white clouds that made visibility nearly impossible. Flashbang grenades followed, their deafening explosions and blinding light designed to disorient and confuse the armed criminals before they could mount effective resistance. Through the chaos and confusion, Camilla could hear Victor shouting orders in Russian, the sharp crack of gunfire, and the authoritative commands of military personnel taking control of her yacht. The sound of her expensive wine glasses shattering and furniture being overturned mixed with the more serious noises of an armed confrontation between international criminals and law enforcement. Agent Cooper, who had been posing as a crew member for the past 6 weeks, immediately moved to secure the artifact storage areas while providing intelligence to the assault teams. His detailed knowledge of the yacht's layout and the criminals' weapons placement had been crucial to planning the operation. Storage areas secured, he reported through his communication system. Estimate 15 to 20 million in stolen artifacts confirmed. No casualties in my area. On the buyer's vessel, Agent Rodriguez was coordinating with the naval team to prevent the destruction of evidence and the escape of wanted criminals. Klaus Weber had managed to activate a device that was systematically destroying computer records, but Rodriguez was photographing everything he could access while guiding the assault team toward the most important targets. Primary targets are attempting to destroy evidence, Rodriguez reported. Need immediate technical support to preserve digital records. Commander Mitchell was monitoring the entire operation from HMS Vigilant, watching multiple video feeds and communication channels as his teams worked to secure some of the most dangerous criminals in the world. The complexity of the operation was enormous, ensuring the safety of undercover agents, preventing the destruction of evidence, capturing international fugitives, and securing priceless stolen artifacts, all while preventing casualties. Status report from all teams, he commanded. Alpha Team has secured the primary vessel, came the response. Multiple suspects in custody, including primary target Viktor Petrov. Some resistance encountered, but no friendly casualties reported. Bravo Team has the buyer's vessel under control, reported the second team. Evidence destruction partially successful, but we've recovered substantial intelligence materials. Charlie Team maintaining perimeter security. No escape attempts detected. But the most important update came from Agent Cooper. Artifact storage area is fully secured. We're looking at one of the largest recoveries of stolen cultural heritage in European history. As the smoke cleared and the immediate violence subsided, the full scope of what they had uncovered began to emerge. The Royal Dawn wasn't just a smuggling vessel. It was a floating warehouse containing artifacts stolen from museums, archaeological sites, and cultural heritage locations across the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. Ancient Mesopotamian tablets that had been looted from Iraqi museums during wartime. Roman statues stolen from archaeological sites in Syria. Byzantine mosaics cut from church walls in war-torn regions. Medieval manuscripts taken from libraries and monasteries. Each piece represented not just monetary value, but irreplaceable fragments of human civilization that had been thought lost forever. Viktor Petrov, now in military custody with his hands secured behind his back, maintained the cold composure that had made him one of Europe's most successful international criminals. Even captured, he radiated the kind of dangerous intelligence that had allowed him to build a criminal empire spanning multiple continents. "You have no idea what you've done," he said quietly to Commander Mitchell as naval personnel secured the scene. "My organization extends far beyond what you've captured tonight. Arresting me will only create opportunities for people who are far more dangerous and far less discriminating in their methods." Mitchell had heard similar threats from captured criminals before, but something in Victor's tone suggested he wasn't making empty boasts. The investigation had revealed connections to terrorist financing, arms trafficking, and criminal operations that extended across multiple countries and organizations. Camilla Richardson sat on the deck of her yacht, wrapped in a military-issued blanket and trying to process the events that had just destroyed her life forever. 3 years of luxury funded by criminal activity had ended in minutes of violence and chaos. Everything she owned would be seized as evidence. Everyone she had worked with was either dead or under arrest, and she faced the prospect of spending the rest of her life in prison for her participation in crimes she was only beginning to understand. But perhaps most devastating was the knowledge that her actions had contributed to the destruction and theft of humanity's cultural heritage. Every artifact that had passed through her yacht represented a piece of human history that had been stolen from its rightful place in museums, universities, and cultural institutions where it could be studied, preserved, and shared with the world. As naval personnel began the complex process of cataloging and securing the recovered artifacts, experts were already being contacted to begin the process of identification and repatriation. Some pieces would be returned to their countries of origin. Others would be placed in museums where they could be properly preserved and studied. All of them would be removed from the black market that had treated humanity's shared heritage as commodities to be bought and sold. The operation had been a complete success from a law enforcement perspective, but the personal cost was devastating for everyone involved. Viktor Petrov would spend the rest of his life in prison, but his criminal organization would likely continue operating under new leadership. The German buyers would face prosecution in multiple countries, but the demand for stolen artifacts would continue to fuel similar operations around the world. And Camilla Richardson, who had started as a desperate widow trying to pay her husband's debts, now faced the reality that her choices had made her complicit in crimes against humanity itself. The artifacts that had funded her luxury lifestyle represented treasures that belonged to all humanity, not private collectors willing to profit from theft and destruction. As dawn broke over the Mediterranean, the Royal Dawn was being towed toward port, its cargo holds full of recovered treasures, and its decks crawling with investigators documenting evidence that would be used in criminal trials across multiple countries. The woman who had once thought she was just facilitating art sales had discovered that she was part of a criminal network that threatened the preservation of human culture itself. The storm that had been building for 3 years had finally broken, and in its wake, nothing remained but the consequences of choices that could never be undone. 6 months after the dramatic arrest on the Mediterranean, Camilla Richardson sat in a sterile courtroom in London, watching as prosecutor Sarah Chun presented evidence that would determine the course of the rest of her life. The woman who had once commanded a luxury yacht worth millions of dollars now wore a simple gray suit and faced the possibility of spending the next 20 years in prison. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Financial records showing millions of dollars in payments from Viktor Petrov's organization. Shipping manifests documenting the transportation of stolen artifacts across international waters. Video surveillance from the yacht showing her direct participation in illegal transactions. phone recordings of conversations where she discussed the movement of merchandise that everyone in the courtroom knew referred to priceless stolen cultural treasures. But perhaps most damaging was her own testimony. Against the advice of her legal team, Camilla had chosen to cooperate fully with international investigators, providing detailed information about Victor's criminal network, the routes used to transport stolen artifacts, and the network of buyers and sellers that had made the operation possible. Her cooperation had led to arrests across 3 continents and the recovery of artifacts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Mrs. Richardson, Prosecutor Chen said during her cross-examination, "You've admitted to facilitating the transportation and sale of stolen artifacts for over 3 years. You've acknowledged receiving millions of dollars in payment for these services. And you've confirmed that you were aware the artifacts in question were stolen from museums, archaeological sites, and cultural heritage locations during armed conflicts." "Yes," Camilla replied quietly, her voice barely audible in the silent courtroom. "I knew. Can you explain to the court how someone in your position, a woman of education and privilege, could participate in activities that you knew were contributing to the destruction of human cultural heritage?" It was the question that Camilla had been asking herself for months. How had a grieving widow trying to pay her deceased husband's debts become complicit in crimes against humanity itself? How had someone who had visited museums and cultural sites around the world become part of a network that was systematically looting and destroying those same institutions? "I was desperate," she said finally, looking directly at the prosecutor rather than at the gallery filled with journalists, art recovery specialists, and representatives from museums whose collections had been impacted by the trafficking network. "When my husband died, I discovered that everything I thought we owned was built on debt and questionable business practices. I was facing bankruptcy, the loss of everything I'd ever known, and the prospect of starting over with nothing at the age of 45. But surely there were legal alternatives to participating in international artifact trafficking. Of course there were. I could have sold the yacht, downsized my lifestyle, taken a regular job, and slowly rebuilt my life through honest work. But I wasn't ready to accept that level of change. I wanted to maintain the lifestyle I had grown accustomed to, and Victor offered me a way to do that." Prosecutor Chun moved closer to the witness stand. "When did you first realize that your activities were contributing to more than just private art collecting?" Camilla closed her eyes briefly, remembering the moment on the yacht when she had understood the true scope of Victor's operations. "The night of the arrest, I realized that the artifact transactions were just cover for much larger criminal activities. The people I was helping weren't just wealthy collectors. They were arms dealers, terrorist financiers, and international criminals who were using stolen cultural heritage as currency for activities that could cost human lives. And how does that knowledge affect your understanding of your own actions? It means that I wasn't just stealing art from museums. I was helping to destroy humanity's shared cultural heritage while funding violence and chaos around the world. Every artifact that passed through my yacht represented a piece of human history that was being sold to finance activities that could result in the deaths of innocent people." The courtroom was completely silent as Camilla struggled to find words for the weight of her guilt. "I told myself for 3 years that I was just a middleman, that I wasn't directly responsible for the theft of the artifacts or their ultimate use. But that was a lie. I was a crucial link in a chain of criminality that stretched across continents and supported activities that threatened everything I claimed to believe in." Dr. Elena Vasquez, a cultural heritage preservation expert who had been called as a witness, testified about the broader impact of artifact trafficking on global cultural preservation efforts. She explained how the systematic looting of museums and archaeological sites during armed conflicts was erasing irreplaceable evidence of human civilization. "The artifacts recovered from Mrs. Richardson's yacht represent more than monetary value," Dr. Vasquez explained to the court. "These are primary sources for understanding ancient civilizations, religious traditions, artistic developments, and historical events that shaped our world. When these artifacts disappear into private collections, that knowledge is lost to researchers, educators, and the general public forever." She displayed photographs of some of the recovered pieces. Mesopotamian tablets containing some of humanity's earliest written records, Roman sculptures that have been documenting artistic techniques for 2 millennia, Byzantine mosaics that have been cut from their original architectural contexts, and could never be fully restored. The trafficking network that Mrs. Richardson participated in wasn't just stealing individual pieces of art. It was systematically erasing the cultural heritage of entire civilizations for the profit of private collectors who valued ownership more than preservation or public access. Commander James Mitchell, who had led the naval operation that resulted in the arrests, testified about the international scope of the criminal network and the challenges of combating cultural heritage trafficking in an interconnected world. Viktor Petrov's organization operated across multiple continents, using legitimate businesses, diplomatic connections, and advanced communication technology to move stolen artifacts through complex routes that made detection and prosecution extremely difficult, he explained. Mrs. Richardson's yacht was just one component of a network that included corrupt officials, armed looters, fraudulent auction houses, and wealthy collectors who were willing to purchase artifacts without asking questions about their provenance. He described the months of international cooperation required to build the case, involving law enforcement agencies, art recovery specialists, museum security experts, and intelligence services across multiple countries. The challenge with cultural heritage crimes is that they often occur in areas experiencing armed conflict or political instability, making immediate law enforcement response impossible. By the time stolen artifacts appear in international markets, they've often passed through multiple hands and jurisdictions. Viktor Petrov, testifying via video link from the maximum security prison where he was serving a life sentence, showed no remorse for his role in the trafficking network. Cold and calculating even in captivity, he confirmed the scope of the operation while making it clear that similar networks would continue operating as long as there was demand from wealthy collectors. Mrs. Richardson was a useful asset to our organization, he said with chilling indifference. She provided exactly what we needed: international mobility, social respectability, and operational security. But she was hardly unique. There are dozens of similar operations currently active around the world, and they will continue to operate as long as wealthy individuals are willing to pay premium prices for exclusive access to cultural treasures. His testimony revealed the true horror of the trafficking network. It wasn't driven by poverty or desperation, but by the greed of wealthy collectors who valued private ownership over cultural preservation. Museums and universities had limited resources to compete with billionaires who were willing to pay millions of dollars for artifacts without asking questions about their legal status. The final witness was Maria Santos, a former money launderer who had cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony revealed how stolen artifacts were used as currency in international criminal operations, their high value and cultural significance making them ideal for concealing and transferring illicit funds. Art and artifacts are perfect for money laundering, she explained. Their value is subjective. Their ownership can be easily transferred, and they can be stored and transported with relative discretion. Victor's organization used stolen cultural heritage as collateral for arms deals, terrorist financing, and drug trafficking operations across multiple continents. She described transactions where ancient artifacts were traded for weapons that would be used in armed conflicts, where medieval manuscripts were exchanged for funds that would finance terrorist attacks, and where stolen cultural treasures became the foundation for criminal enterprises that threatened global security. As the trial drew to its conclusion, Camilla faced a question that had haunted her for months. What punishment could possibly address the scope of her crimes against human culture itself? She had helped steal and destroy irreplaceable evidence of human civilization. She had contributed to financing activities that threatened global security. And she had done it all for the sake of maintaining a lifestyle built on luxury and privilege. Judge Margaret Thompson, who had overseen similar cases involving international art crime, addressed Camilla directly during the sentencing hearing. Mrs. Richardson, the crimes you've admitted to extend far beyond simple theft or fraud. You've participated in the systematic destruction of humanity's cultural heritage, activities that have impacted museums, universities, researchers, and the general public around the world. Your cooperation with law enforcement has been valuable and has led to significant recoveries and arrests. However, the scope and duration of your criminal activities, combined with the irreplaceable nature of the cultural treasures involved, requires a sentence that reflects both the seriousness of these crimes and the need to deter similar activities in the future. Camilla stood to receive her sentence, knowing that her life, as she had known it, was over. The woman who had once hosted charity auctions and attended museum galas would spend the next 15 years in prison, followed by a lifetime of probation and community service focused on cultural heritage preservation and education. But perhaps more important than the legal consequences was the personal reckoning she had undergone during the months of investigation and trial. She had been forced to confront the reality that her privileged lifestyle had been built on activities that threatened the preservation of human culture itself. The artifacts that had funded her luxury had represented irreplaceable links to civilizations that had shaped the world, and her actions had contributed to their destruction. As she was led from the courtroom to begin her sentence, Camilla carried with her the knowledge that some choices cannot be undone and some damage cannot be repaired. The cultural treasures that had passed through her yacht would hopefully be returned to their proper homes in museums and cultural institutions, but the knowledge and context that had been lost during their theft could never be fully recovered. The network that Viktor Petrov had built would likely continue operating under new leadership, driven by the same combination of greed, desperation, and indifference to cultural preservation that had made Camilla's participation possible.